Administrator Isaacman, thanks so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here.
It's good to have you here. Congratulations on the Artemis 2 mission. It certainly, I think, for a lot of people and for NASA, marked a new generation or a new moment in space exploration in terms of the nature of the flight, the partnerships that made it possible. So can you explain why you're reprioritizing the moon for people who might be skeptical of why we should do that?
Well, I would say that I'm not reprioritizing at all. What I'm doing is working with all the the talented minds at NASA to ensure our plan to achieve the policy that's essentially been in place since President Trump's first term when he created the Artemis program is actually possible. So 35 years, every president has called for a return to the moon. It sounds great. Certainly, I think, gets the public riled up. It wasn't until President Trump's first term when he actually created the Artemis program that put focus back on it again. And then my first day on the job, the day I was sworn into office, he put out a national space policy that said, don't just return to the moon, do so to stay. Build an enduring presence, build a moon base on the surface.
What would establishing bases on the moon allow us to do?
So that's a great question. For 25 years, we have maintained a continuous human presence in low Earth orbit at the International Space Station, which people probably don't realize. But if you take a step back and think about it, if you're 25 years old or younger, you haven't lived during a time where there wasn't an American astronaut in orbit above you, which is pretty cool to think about because the environment is incredibly harsh. You have a radiation environment, you have micrometeoroid orbital debris. Those are like billions of bullets just whizzing around, tear through everything up there. The human body, human physiology does not like microgravity, so you have bone density loss, cardiovascular issues. We just did the first medical evacuation from the space station. So things happen there, but we have been learning. And where do you apply that next? You take it from low Earth orbit, which is probably the safest place you can be in an incredibly threatening environment, and you bring it down to the lunar surface. For all its scientific potential, I mean, we are going to have so many scientific instruments. There are kids in college right now working on hardware that's going to be on the moon in the next couple of years. Its economic potential. Are we mining helium-3 on the moon? Are we 3D printing satellites for AI data centers? I sure hope so. And then I would just say it's the technological proving ground to get to Mars.
Well, there's a lot of interest from investors in this. And I'm curious about the timeline for those things that you mentioned, because when a lot of people think about the space economy now, they think of something like SpaceX or Starlink from SpaceX. But the things that you're talking about seem far off into the future. Well,
I would just say that any time NASA undertakes and attempts to achieve the near impossible, we never go it alone. We bring everybody with us because it takes the contributions from across industry and academia and, honestly, international partners. So 1960s, we had Boeing, we had Northrop, Grumman built the lunar lander, we had McDonnell Douglas, and you still have many of those companies today. But then you have your new players like your Blue Origins, your SpaceX, Firefly, Intuitive Machines, lots of Rocket Lab, lots of good commercial companies. And what I would say is there is a real commercial space economy right now. I mean, launch, observation, and communication. NASA's one customer of many. That's how you know it's real. Lots of customers, lots of demand there. We're going to put a huge demand signal out for building a moon base. 30 landers, dozens of rovers. I can't tell you who's buying the 31st. I can't tell you who's buying the next rover after NASA at that point. So we are still that first customer, but it's a heck of a demand signal in the right direction to ideally spark what becomes a lunar economy.
So let's talk a little bit about geopolitics, because in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, NASA's greatest competitor was the Soviet Union. Today, that really seems to have shifted to China. From your view, how advanced are Beijing's programs?
I think we fool ourselves at times when we refer to the Chinese in various technological domains and call them a near peer. The reality is, in many cases, they are a peer. And I would say, with respect to their space program, and it's hard because they're not as transparent as we are. We have our Civil Space Agency, which is NASA, and then we have our Space Force. And their job is to look out for the national security interests of the ultimate high ground that is space. In China, they don't draw a distinction. And but what I will tell you in both of those categories, so their civil space program and on their military side, their national security capabilities in space, it's extremely impressive, extremely impressive. They are moving very, very fast. And, what you think you know about what they're capable of doing in that domain from 6 months ago, they've already surpassed that by a couple generations. I mean, in a lot of ways, they are moving at SpaceX speeds.
When we were competing with the Soviet Union, the budget that you had at NASA was roughly 4.5% of total government expenditures. Right now, what, a quarter of 1% of government expenditures? Can you compete with China with that level of funding?
Absolutely. I mean, the president's budget request is more than every other civil space agency in the world combined. Now, again, that's kind of hard to nail down perfectly with China because they blur the lines with their military spend. And look, it's different times now. We knew nothing about the Great Frontier in the 1960s other than that it was an effort worth undertaking. And today, between the $10 billion one-time and plus-up that came through the Working Family Tax Cut Act, plus our budget and our appropriations, yes, we can return to the moon, we can build a moon base, and we can do the other things because we know a lot more today than we did then. Industry has evolved quite a bit, but it is an extremely close race. I say it all the time. Winning, success or failure will come down to months, not years.
Jim Bridenstine, the NASA administrator during President Trump's first term, has said that China is likely going to win. Is he wrong?
I think he's wrong in that to say they would be advantaged. As I said, we are close. We've said we're going to land astronauts on the moon before the end of President Trump's term. The Chinese have said they will land their technonauts on the moon before 2030. So that does come down to months, not years, if you look at the timeframes. But we have an achievable plan, and we've been there before. So we're very advantaged in building the moon base. We're very advantaged in next giant leap capabilities like nuclear. When it comes to the boots, yes, it's a closer race, but I have no doubt the best and brightest at NASA, we're not going to come in second place.
You've got this amazing story. You come from the private sector. You built this business in your parents' basement in New Jersey. You're an entrepreneur. You're an executive. You're a pilot, a fighter pilot. You're an astronaut. You've moved really quickly in your career. All this to say, you don't really go at Washington speed. Do the political extremes that we have slow us down when it comes to competing with the rest of the world?
Well, I would just say I have one boss now, the President of the United States, and I couldn't have a better boss. But to your point, there are a lot of stakeholders that have strong views. The nice thing is they all love NASA. So like right from the get-go, you go to any of my hearings, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, there is strong bipartisan support for NASA's mission. Now, they all think we should do it differently. So bringing a lot of people together that have different views and getting them aligned around doing extremely hard things, I have some experience with that. And I'll tell you, it is a lot of my time trying to get everybody aligned. I think having a competitor like China that is moving incredibly fast is helpful at clearing out needless bureaucracy and delays and things that impede progress, right? And that's working. Now, if you don't take an active role, if you are not going, like I said, hard charging with a strong team, 18, 20 hours a day, if that's what it takes, yes, the pace of government moves slowly, and it's not always aligned in the best interest of the mission. It might be aligned in the best interest of a congressional district or a particular vendor, but we are fixing that now. So
what have you learned about how to make sure you get what NASA needs?
Well, I think being able to be a good communicator and tell the story, right? And that is what I've been doing. To have a conversation with an important congressman, senator, an industry leader, and explain to them, imagine what it was like when you saw Artemis 2 going on the far side of the moon, that special moment, you're sitting with your kid, your grandkid or something. Now imagine the same thing when somebody's stepping foot off a lander on the moon, except it's a Chinese technonaut. What is that going to do? What message does that send to the world that says something is broken? And I tell industry, get aligned right now. Everything you lobby for better be in the interest of America's national imperative of returning to the moon. Because if not, if we see the Chinese get to the moon before America is able to return, I'll be fired. I'll be at home watching on TV as all of you get hauled before Congress and have to explain where the $100 billion went. So think about that every time you work against me versus putting your resources in the correct direction.
How do they respond when you communicate like that?
I think we're moving really fast now.
It's working.
I think we're moving really fast now.
It's working.
I mean, we're adding missions. We're launching moon rockets now with frequency. Artemis 3 is up in 2027, and the world is going to be able to follow along in early 27 as we put robotic landers on the moon nearly monthly and start building that moon base.
So talk a little bit about Artemis 3, because NASA's already working on that. What does success in that mission look like?
Success in that mission, is going to be, you're going to see 3 distinct the most powerful rockets in the world launch in quick succession. So you're going to see SLS, which is what launched Artemis 2, that will launch. You will see New Glenn launch, which will put the Blue Origin lander into low Earth orbit. And then you're going to see Starship launch, which will put their HLS lunar lander in low Earth orbit. So 3 massive launches in quick succession. And then you're going to see the Orion spacecraft rendezvous and dock with the Blue Origin lander, test out the interoperability, detach, rendezvous, dock with the Starship lander, the SpaceX lander in low Earth orbit, test out, the full stack controllability, and then it's going to detach, come back, and land. And what that should tell us, it should teach us more about the Orion spacecraft. It should build muscle memory about launching SLS, which is extremely complicated, 8.8 million pounds of thrust. You cannot get that wrong. And it's going to teach us a lot about our 2 landers, Blue and SpaceX. That data, no doubt, will result in hardware changes, software updates, procedural changes, to permit in 2028 Artemis 4 to take the astronauts to the surface of the moon. How
would you rate the readiness of SpaceX and Blue Origin for those missions?
Both Blue Origin and SpaceX have provided, detailed responses back to NASA on their ability to meet our 2027 timeline for a low Earth orbit test of their landers. They both are enthusiastic about it. First of all, they both know that this must be done. And by the way, so did everyone at NASA. I didn't come in and say, I think we should launch rockets with greater frequency here and build muscle memory. They all wanted to do that. They weren't allowed to do that for some time. Again, they were trying to make everybody happy, which, by the way, usually results in no one being happy. So the NASA team wants to launch big rockets and start building muscle memory and get back to an iterative design approach. SpaceX certainly appreciates it. I mean, they basically are leveraging our playbook from the 60s of being hardware rich, fail fast, learn and inform the next one, and Blue Origin understands. So we're all aligned about what needs to happen in 27 in order to make 28 successful.
Well, staying on the private sector a little bit, if SpaceX does go public in the coming months, what does that mean for NASA specifically? What does it mean for investment in the lunar economy more broadly?
Okay, I will happily take every one of NASA's critical suppliers being incredibly well capitalized. Space is expensive. Space is extremely hard. We know for sure that launch observation and communications has real commercial viability, that NASA is one customer of many. You can get more value out than you put in. But beyond that, we don't know. So the fact that the private markets are going to fund this next evolution of a space economy with orbital data centers and AI satellites, that's awesome.
What about an update on just getting the top talent to NASA right now? It was a different approach in the 1960s and the late 50s.
Because we were the only game in town.
Exactly. You were the only game in town. And certainly there were government contractors at that time. But now there's so much opportunity for young talent to go to places like Blue Origin, places like SpaceX. You can get equity. It pays more. How do you get them to come to work for you?
First and foremost is you got to just inspire the next generation. They got to want to grow up and work for NASA. Fortunately, that hasn't been too much of a problem for us. We had 200 and some odd thousand internship applications this past year. We took the top 1%, so that's good. And then you launch missions like Artemis 2, Artemis 3, you put astronauts back on the moon, you build a moon base, you launch a nuclear-powered octocopter to Saturn's moon of Titan in 2028, or a nuclear spaceship. That's a good way to inspire people to grow up and want to contribute. But how do you get them to want to come to NASA when you don't have the big equity appreciation like you have from industry and such? That means we need to work on what no one else is doing. And that was certainly the case in the 60s when we were the only game in town. Not always the case today. We build big rockets. SpaceX builds big rockets. SpaceX equity goes off the charts. NASA doesn't have any equity to go off the charts. So what does that mean? We have to recalibrate constantly at NASA to do the near impossible, what no company, what no other government agency, what no other nation is capable of doing. That's why we're working on nuclear power and propulsion. I put the model on the president's desk in the Oval Office of SR-1 Freedom. It's going to launch in 2028. It's the first of its kind nuclear-powered interplanetary spaceship. It's going to go past Mars, drop off a couple helicopters, like the Ingenuity-class helicopters with ground-penetrating radar. It's going to scout out future landing sites for astronauts and look for water ice. That's the kind of thing you do that no one else can do. No one wants to mess around again with highly enriched uranium or launch nuclear reactors. It's what it should be. It's inherently government function. Only NASA can do it. And as a result, you're going to attract the people who want to work on those programs, and you're going to retain them because you're not competing with industry.
I've heard you tell a story about when you were in kindergarten and you went to the library and just had this insatiable demand for checking out books about the space shuttle. What's the equivalent of that right now? How does this program, how do you inspire the next Jared Isaacman?
Well, I would say it starts before you even get that picture book, right? For me, and I think it's this way for a lot of kids around the world, is when you just simply look up at the night sky and look at the stars and just wonder about the possibilities. That's why I love running NASA, right? I mean, we have so much great content to work with. The whole universe is available to us. But what's inspiring kids today after they get that initial curiosity? Is it self-landing rockets on ships like we see SpaceX and Blue Origin do? Is it the video that comes back from Curiosity or Perseverance on Mars? Like we have giant rovers on Mars. Is our nuclear-powered octocopter going to Titan? Is it Artemis 2, Artemis 3, 4 when astronauts are walking on the moon? I guarantee you when American astronauts return to the lunar surface, you're going to have a lot of kids dressing up as astronauts for Halloween. And then we just got to take them the rest of the way from there.
I did get to put my kids in front of the screen, a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old, to watch Artemis 2 take off, and it was awesome.
We're just getting going.
You've said before that the odds that aliens exist is pretty high. NASA is actively looking for them. That's part of what NASA does.
Of course.
What exactly are you looking for?
So I would say a lot of what we're doing is just looking for, what are the building blocks to life and biosignatures that are out there. It's hard because you are taking measurements, at great distances from Earth itself. I think that if we had the same data that our robotic rovers on Mars have been able to transmit back home to us, but we had those samples here instead of being on the surface of Mars, I think better than 90% chance you bring the samples home from Mars, you will prove that there was once microbial life on Mars. Most people look up at the night sky and say, surely it's out there somewhere. You have 2 trillion galaxies. We barely know our own star system. Let alone all the other stars in the Milky Way galaxy, let alone 2 trillion other stars. And it is inherent to what we do at NASA is try and answer the question, are we alone? But you get samples back from Mars that say there was once microbial life there. Europa Clipper sends back biosignatures. Dragonfly goes to Saturn's moon of Titan and sends back biosignatures. Habitable Worlds Observatory launches and says, oh, we looked at all these other exoplanets and Goldilocks zones. There's biosignatures there. It changes the game to, what if it's everywhere?
What I love about this conversation and what I find fascinating is that we often approach it from the perspective of us finding them. What are the odds that someone else or another species or another form of life has found us?
I would say extremely low. You think about it, human civilization is just a small span of time relative to the age of the universe, even relative to the age of our planet itself. As long as you acknowledge that the speed of light is your galactic speed limit, and how close we are to other stars and how close we are to other galaxies on a scale it's extremely hard, I think, for most people to really appreciate. It's very hard for me to even appreciate the odds of intelligent life finding us at a time period where we are alive as we know ourselves to be right now. It would be, I would say, almost impossible.
Administrator Isaacman, thanks so much for joining us on Bloomberg.
Thank you. It's great to be here.